While we're still waiting on INMO Air 3s to be delivered, we could take a look at the INMO Air's birth of this particular display and optics solution and see what some really interesting advances were made 4 years ago now to really use a micro OLED panel for a heads-up display glass. Today we are back with an INMO pair of glasses, specifically the INMO Airs. These are about 4 years old at this point, so it seems a little untimely, but the actual display and optics solution that INMO presented in their AR, or really heads-up display glasses, has been very similar from generation to generation, with really the big advancement in the optics for the INMO Air 3s, which are making some waves now because there's an international release finally, really upping the resolution of the micro OLED panel that is used to inject the image into the one-dimensional waveguide. Now, the glasses themselves are bulky and very dark in terms of the overall lens opacity. Maybe starting with the audio, the actual audio itself is pretty good. We've got a relatively quiet speaker, around 56 dBA in ear at max volume. Now, this is fine. For reference, the Meta Ray-Ban displays are at around 76, so 20 dB higher output than we can get in these particular in-ear speakers. But because the speakers are quieter, you can also expect a quieter environment around you for said music or other audio content delivery. The camera. Now we have a single 5 megapixel capture camera on the left temple. This is bad. It is, again, 4-year-old device, but the 5 megapixel camera that was chosen here produces very bad quality images, even compared to something like a selfie cam on a modern phone. The thermals of this device, because we're using a 600 by 400p display, we're not getting too much runaway heat being generated in the device. We're measuring around 32, 33 Celsius maximum, specifically within the projector housing area where the actual micro OLED panel is being housed. Outside of that, we have some heat that is generated in the right temple, suspect where the core processing is happening, but we'll take a look at that later. Otherwise, the device is quite cool and quite comfortable, especially during extended operations. Now, getting into the display and waveguide solution. Again, for the panel, we have what is a very typical Sony micro OLED display at this point. It's a 600 by 400p display, probably a 640 by 480p display that we can see that's housed inside of this plastic housing at the top of the right temple. This is where the display actually injects the light into our one-dimensional expander, and we'll get into that as we start tearing the device apart. But because it's one of those Sony OLED panels, we also have less than desired color purity. We see that the Sony micro OLED panels have this characteristic wide blue and green emitter that overlap, especially in the light greens or dark blues, which means that we don't have as large of a color volume as you might see, for example, in the Ray Neos, which use a much purer blue and green emitter from SIA. Now, that's totally fine. We still get very good color fidelity here, especially compared to no color from most monochrome devices like INMO's Go series. But overall, it is something to note that these panels do have an older OLED emitter technology, which will restrict the color volume. But the overall glasses themselves are quite nice. The pressure that we get from the temples pushing up on the back of your head is actually quite low. At the max range of head sizes that I've tested at about 18 centimeter width of your head, you're getting about a 2 Newton force that's being applied to the back of your head. That can get pretty uncomfortable, but when we normalize it for the actual contact area, it's very much so in range with something like the Google Glass or some other devices. We're getting about a 16 to 17 kPa, kilopascal force that's being applied locally. Certainly higher than something like regular sunglasses. My Maui Jims are around 7 to 8 kPa, but definitely not outside of the realm of comfort. I have definitely had much more vice grip-esque devices like the Rokid or the X Reels at some point. So we'll start testing those in more of these glasses moving forward. But for now, let's take a look at the hardware. The first thing that we have to do to start taking apart our lenses is just to pop off these protective covers, which can also be your prescription lenses, should you choose to order these with prescription. Once we have these off, we have a few Phillips head screws that we can choose to either take off now, 2 on either temple, and 2 holding down the nose bridge clips on the inside here. And this allows us to slide out the nose clips and replace them with other ones should you choose to do so. We now have 2 Phillips screws that we have to remove, 1 on each temple, 2 more on the outside of the temple on the back of this faceplate, as well as 2 more holding the actual temple connected to our main faceplate. And check to see if we have the ability to take off the faceplate after removing these. After removing those 2 screws, we do see that the faceplate is coming off. So we'll try to remove the 2 screws on the other side first and see if we can just easily unclip the faceplate. Looks like INMO has made it quite easy for us to simply remove our faceplate, which was only clipped in place. So now, if we were to use a small plastic spudger and go around the outside, now that we've unclipped the top of our faceplate, we'll leave behind a little spudger and go and unclip the bottom of the lenses. And with all of those plastic clips taken off, we can very easily remove what is the front cover of our INMO Airs, revealing what is a very sleek and very small waveguide that has been created for this one-dimensional pupil expansion. One tricky part of our disassembly, especially on the temples, is that while we can remove the 2 Phillips head screws at the nose bridge side and quite easily start popping off all of the retaining clips that are around the perimeter, there is a hidden 3rd Phillips head screw on this temple. And that is under this little rubber grommet that is the main pad that will be sitting up against your head. This has been glued on very strongly onto the inner side of the temples. So you'll have to remove this, and only then will you have access to the internal screw that is under that rubber piece. And finally, removing that, we are able to remove all of the retaining clips and have access to the internal circuitry of the INMO Airs, at the very least the right side temple. Now that we've removed our faceplate and the insides of our 2 temples, next we'll go to the sides of the faceplate. To remove the optical module, we'll have to further remove the bracket on the left temple by removing these 2 Phillips head screws. And finally, when we remove the 2 Phillips head screws that are hiding close to our display panel, it can help lift up the temple. And by we unplug the display flex cable, we'll need to remove the main logic board from inside of the left temple to be able to unplug the cable that routes the power and the rest of the signals for the audio module and our camera on the left side. This is held in place by a Phillips head screw in the northeast corner, as well as a Phillips head screw in the bottom right. We can see that this cable is actually simply just routing one connector on the south side of the board and another connector on the north side of the board. And as we remove those two connectors, we see that we are left with our main optical module inside of our nose bridge. Our motherboard connector and our camera flex connector are glued on top of the heatsink behind our display. So with a little bit of alcohol, we can move them out of the way for the rest of this teardown. Once we move these out of the way, we can see that there's a small retention clip that holds this metal can piece. And as we remove this can piece, we can see that we have our primary display board, the driver that actually drives our micro OLED panel, and the connector to said panel inside this ZIF connector here. We'll temporarily remove this while we continue to access the display panel and see if we can get easily into this module by removing the two Phillips head screws. We'll move this to the side and remove the two Phillips head screws. This bracket will also have a third screw located on the front of our faceplate that we'll need to remove. We also have a small rubber gasket which holds in place the waveguide and pushes it into the actual main frame of the unit. But with that out of the way, we can finally pull apart the display engine. Once we've pulled off the display plus waveguide module, we can take apart two more Phillips head screws, one on either side of the display module. We'll be able to lift the optic out of place, revealing the first of our lens elements on the right that magnifies the image from the small 0.2 inch display that we have underneath and injects it finally into the other optical elements that we have as part of our waveguide module that we see here in the far left. Now, the entire optical module for the INMO Air is actually quite simple. We start off with our OLED microdisplay, which we see at the far right side here. This, when powered on, delivers the image that we get magnified through our entire optical module and delivered to the user's eye. The image from this microdisplay then passes through a first magnification lens, which is a plano-convex lens, while then continuing on to our next lens element, which is another plano-convex lens. This lens will then serve to further focus the image further at roughly 0.2 to 0.3 meters. And that image will then be bounced into our waveguide module, a reflective waveguide similar to what we saw on the Meta Ray-Ban displays. This waveguide consists of a very simple 45-degree mirror that helps input our image into the waveguide itself, where the image is then bounced back and forth inside the waveguide until it reaches our partial reflectors, or our partial mirrors. Here we see a series of 6 increasingly less transmissive or more reflective mirrors that help bounce the image to the user's eye. These mirrors get progressively more and more reflective as we go farther and farther into the device, and this is ultimately how we get an eye box that is quite wide and giving us that 26-degree field of view in our glass element. Very impressive to see INMO use this quite efficient design, and it allows the use of a 3000 nit OLED microdisplay to still provide a relatively high emission image, quoted as 500 nits to user's eye, but more likely 2 to 300 nits after some of the optical losses throughout this waveguide design. Nevertheless, however many actual nits we get extracted through the user's eye, it's really impressive to see one of the first reflective waveguides in a consumer product as far back as 2021 used with a very high fidelity micro OLED display that can also then pair to an external device and mirror your screen to display any content you might want, which is significantly different than today's devices, which are generally locked to first-party apps. Great move by INMO here. And all very disassemblable with minimal glue throughout the entire optical assembly, using only mechanical features or mechanical datums to actually provide the quite good assembly between all of these components. And that will pretty much wrap up the INMO Airs. For a 4-year-old device, it's really impressive what INMO was able to do kind of on its first at-bat with an AR glass. The use of the geometric waveguide in particular to increase the efficiency and compensate for the fact that we have a very low brightness micro OLED panel in our optical stack was actually quite impressive. And it may be interesting to see what we are able to see with the INMO Air 3s, which use a much brighter 1080p Sony micro OLED panel. So we'll see some of the same issues with the primary emitters not being quite as pure. Other than that, I expect a significant improvement in both picture quality and in overall brightness. And if INMO can continue to deliver the incredible openness of the software ecosystem, which it has on the Air platform, and improve on some of the issues that it had with iOS connectivity that we had in the Go series, I think these could be a really, really compelling device for a headset that actually does a lot more than some of the really expensive ones on the market today. That's all for the INMO Air Teardown. If you've got any questions or comments, leave them down below. Otherwise, until next time, thanks. Bye.